It's really easy to see somebody on YouTube and think that they have some idea of what they're talking about, but the truth is I do a lot of stupid things. I'm learning more about backpacking every single day, and just because I talk about this stuff on the internet doesn't mean that I'm actually any sort of expert or anything like that. In fact, I'd be willing to bet that there are lots of you in the comments that actually know way more than I do. I say all of this not to talk down to myself or anything like that, but because this channel is all about growing, about me learning more and you learning more alongside me through thick and thin and all the dumb mistakes that might be made. What it's not about is feeding my ego. In that spirit, let's talk about 5 stupid mistakes that I've made in pursuit of a lighter base weight. Cars. So the first stupid mistake that I made trying to lighten my base weight was buying a quilt. Now I know what you're thinking. You might be saying to yourself, Tim, I have a quilt. Are you saying that I'm dumb? No, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm getting at. But it was dumb for me specifically to buy one because I am a very, very, very active sleeper. I roll around all night long. I'm on the Neo Air, so it's like, you get the drift. I'm very active and I tend to roll around quite a bit. And the truth is, every time that I would turn over when I had a quilt, at least in cold weather, a draft would come in and just blast me with cold air and get rid of whatever heat or warmth I had started to build up for the evening. Again, I don't think that quilts are bad pieces of gear by any means. I think that for a lot of people, in particular those that sleep on their back and don't roll around a whole bunch, it's probably really awesome because you can potentially save a bit of weight and you don't have any zippers to worry about failing or anything like that. But for me personally, it really didn't work out very well. The quilt that I purchased was an Enlightened Equipment Enigma, and I ended up eBaying it at some point just because I stopped using it. And it really was an awesome piece of gear. It was incredibly well made. It was pretty light, but I was just always cold. And I don't like to be cold when I sleep. I like to be cozy. After that, I ended up switching to the Z-Packs, what was it, 20-degree classic sleeping bag, which is what I have now. It's a hoodless sleeping bag, so when you open it all the way up, it is essentially a quilt, but it has a zipper instead of just straps. Weirdly enough, I did spec out my old Enlightened Equipment Enigma and my Z-Packs classic sleeping bag, and it turns out that the sleeping bag actually weighs less. Who would have thunk it? And the reason is because I was an active sleeper, I had to go with the wide quilt as opposed to a regular. So even though I originally bought the quilt to save some weight, it actually ended up being heavier because I had to go with a wide. So long story short, I do think that quilts are awesome if you can get away with it and if you're not a super active sleeper. Personally, it's not my thing for the colder weather. I do want to pick one up for the summer though. I think that it would be pretty nice to have a 40-degree synthetic quilt that I could then use to layer on top of my 20-degree bag when it's super cold out in the winter. I already have a 40-degree sleeping bag, so I'm not really in any rush to replace it, but I probably will at some point. Stupid thing number 2 is suffering on a foam pad. I am one of those weird people that actually prefers to sleep on foam whenever possible. For whatever reason, I just can't get comfortable on inflatable pads. There's something about being that high raised off the ground that my body's just always kind of tense. Even when I'm sleeping, it's just trying not to fall off. Maybe I need to try a wide or something like that. I don't really know. But anyway, I've always just slept better on foam. It's just a better night's sleep for me. That said, it is not the best choice in all conditions. And for a while, a foam pad was all that I had because it was light and because it was cheap. I remember a particularly shitty night. I was out on Mount St. Helens with my buddy Craig, and it was like early fall, something like that, so it wasn't terribly cold. And we picked what was already a really bad campsite in retrospect. It was right next to a lake, and sort of the sand that went around it, we were camping on that, and the sand was wet. I'm not sure why we chose this. Presumably it's because it was pretty. And when you first start backpacking or first start getting into it, you tend to pick campsites that are pretty rather than campsites that are warm and comfortable. But my God, was I cold. I froze all night long. I was shivering. It was terrible. After that, I ended up investing in the Neo Air X-Therm, which has been my go-to pad now for like 7 years. The thing is freaking awesome. I still use my foam pad in the summer, but truth is I don't really go out that often in the summer. Summers around here are full of bugs and people, which I try to avoid when I'm in the backcountry. Quality sleep is incredibly important, so don't try and save a couple of ounces by skimping on your pad. I know that we all want to be like Jupiter and sleep on a 1/8 inch foam pad in 20-degree weather, because let's be honest, that is just badass. But I am just not one of those people, or I just really suck at picking campsites. I'm not really sure. But either way, go ahead and invest in a pad that is warm enough for the conditions that you expect. Stupid mistake number 3, 3 was having a tarp or nothing mentality when it comes to shelter setups. When I first started using a tarp, I wanted really bad to be one of the cool kids. You know what I'm talking about. The guys that go out there with like 4 pounds of gear and they're just living the dream. Well, it looks like they're living the dream. They're barely carrying anything with them. I don't know where I'm going with this, but you know what I'm saying. We've all pictured ourselves being that kind of person that can just wander out in the woods with basically nothing and thrive. And because of this, I just always thought that a tarp was the only valid option, at least for a really long time anyway. I hadn't considered taking, you know, a tent or even, you know, gasp, a hammock. There's lots of different options, lots of different shelters that you can take with you, and you don't need to be tied to a tarp just because it's super light. Don't make the same mistakes that I did. If you've been watching the channel for a while, and I've said this a million times at this point, but you know that I freaking love tarps. They're absolutely great. They're super lightweight, they resist condensation, which is usually a pretty big issue here in the Pacific Northwest, but they're not always the best tool for the job, especially when it comes to weight. You know, we get it in our heads that going out with a tarp is going to be the absolute lightest way of doing things, but if you have to add a bug net or a bathtub floor or a bivvy or something like that in order to complement your tarp in whatever conditions you expect, all of a sudden you are approaching or exceeding the weight of a very lightweight tent. As you may or may not know, depending on how long you've been following along here, I recently switched to the Z-Packs Plex Solo as my primary kind of go-to shelter that I keep in my pack. I still love tarps and I still use them whenever I can because they're awesome, but it's not really something that makes sense to just grab kind of without thinking about it like you can with a tent. When I take a tent with me, I know that I have the bug protection, I have the splash protection, and I have a relatively enclosed space that I can change in, which may or may not matter kind of depending on the trip and if there's people with you and that sort of thing. But the point is, I really don't have to think about it at all. So to recap, tarps are rad, and I highly recommend that you give one a shot, but don't make the same mistake that I did of thinking that it is the only way to go or the only valid shelter option for somebody that considers themselves ultralight. We're quoting ultralight now. Stupid mistake number 4 is not paying attention to food or water weight. Sometimes more than half of your pack weight can be food and water, and there are some strategies that you can implement to actually lighten this load. The mistake that I made was focusing on gear and how I can lighten up that side of things as opposed to consumables, which are just as, if not more important to lighten up on, depending on the length of your trip and how much gear you have with you in the first place. For instance, when I originally started going out, I would take a lot of tuna in foil packets or chicken in foil packets. If you've seen any of my recent recipe videos, you know that I do still enjoy those from time to time, but the truth is, over the course of a longer trip, those are actually very heavy because they contain a lot of water, and you can shave off a ton of weight by going with dehydrated options. Also, by taking a little bit of time before a trip to put together a menu that's relatively high in fat as opposed to carbs or protein, you end up with food that's more calorically dense, so you have to take less of it with you. Think nuts, cheese, olive oil, that sort of thing. We got a plane. Maybe it's a boat. I don't know. We're gonna roll with it though, because I don't feel like waiting for it to pass. So, there's another one. What the heck? Like I said in my video last week where I talked about packing food for a trip, if you love fresh, water-rich food, don't let my silly video stop you from taking it with you. Seriously, go out and enjoy yourself. Personally, I love taking avocados and apples because they make my belly feel good, as opposed to eating energy bars all day long, which are basically just clay. But the mistake that I made was that it didn't really occur to me that I could consider cutting out weight by focusing on my food. In terms of water, that might be a place to lighten up as well. I say this cautiously. Make sure that you are taking enough water with you that you don't die of thirst or become seriously dehydrated. But I live in the Pacific Northwest, and most of my hikes, I am crossing a stream like every mile. Oh, we got people coming. People love hiking down here, which is good. You know, you see a lot of people. Hello. Enjoy your hike. I completely lost my train of thought here. Water. So I live in the Pacific Northwest, and I pretty much always carry 2 liters of water, even though there are streams literally everywhere where I'm hiking. Especially when it's just one of my regular overnight trips. I go to the same places pretty much all the time, so I know exactly where the streams are, so I'm in no danger of dying of thirst. I don't need to be carrying another liter of water, especially when you consider the fact that each liter of water is a whopping 2 pounds or so, roughly, ballpark. I think a liter of water is 1 kilogram. Again, make sure that you pack enough water, but you can think a little bit critically and make sure that you're not taking too much, which is a big mistake that I always made. And finally, tip number 5 is trying to replace gear rather than just eliminating it. For a while there, I got really carried away with trying to find lighter weight options for things that I probably didn't need in the first place. A big one that comes to mind is trying to replace all of my stuff sacks with lighter DCF stuff sacks. I mean, come on, they're stuff sacks, they weigh like nothing. Where I'm at now, and where I would have been much better off in the first place before investing like $150 in DCF stuff sacks, is just to get rid of most of the stuff sacks and use a pack liner instead. Another good example is trying to get lighter... Damn crow! Another good example is trying to get lighter versions of extra layers that you have in your pack so that they aren't quite as heavy. But maybe think to yourself, do I need all of those layers? Are there any that I could get rid of? Seriously though, just like with the water, don't go out and subject yourself to unnecessary risks just because some dude on the internet suggested that maybe you're carrying too many layers. But you know, maybe if where you live is similar to my region, which is relatively warm and dry during the summer, rather than investing in lighter sleep clothes, for instance, you could just choose not to take any with you at all. Sleep in your hiking shorts, you're not gonna get rained on. This is just an example, but you get where I'm going. The point is, it's easy to get in the habit of just throwing money at your base weight. Whereas in some cases, as long as you're being safe, you could try to do without instead. Anyway, that's it for me. If you enjoy this, I have a whole nother video on stupid things that I've done in the past. I'm gonna put it somewhere. I always forget which side it pops up on, so I don't know, but I'm gonna put it up here. Go ahead and check that out if you'd like. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next one.